I highly recommend it. Not always easy. I'm a little tired. Get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you sit through till 9 o'clock at night, but something does happen, and it's a good thing to do if your body allows you. So, first of all, I want to thank Debbie and Marilyn. I wasn't able to listen to what they did on Monday because I was going into sesshin, and I may repeat what they did, but thank you so much to both of you. And so the Brahmaviharas. The Brahmaviharas are Theravadan teachings. I was thinking, maybe some of you have heard me tell this story, is that within my lifetime as a young woman beginning to study Zen in my 20s at San Francisco Zen Center, I remember sitting in the Green Gulch Zendo. You know, one never knows what I made up or what I remember, but this is, I'll tell you my story, is that there was a kind of contentious discussion about whether it was okay to chant the Loving Kindness Sutra at Zen Center because it wasn't Zen. So things have changed a lot. And we're very, very lucky to live in a time when we have access to the different traditions and they're all melding. And of course, Zen is full of loving kindness, but I don't think, maybe there are, Zen doesn't talk a lot about explicitly love and loving kindness. It's all implied. Zazen is love. Koans and the intimacy of being one with the whole world is love and loving kindness. And we're so lucky that we can chant the Metta Sutta. It comes out of the Vipassana tradition that is now a way that we express ourselves no matter what Buddhist tradition we're practicing in. So that's part of what I wanted to do, and we'll see how much time. I get so excited about all these things I want to share with you, and then I never know how much time I'm going to have. So we'll just see how much time we have. But I have three different books. One is Being Nobody Going Nowhere by Aya Kema, who, what did I do with? She was German, but she was ordained as a Buddhist nun in Sri Lanka in 1979 and stayed pretty true to the Theravadan path. So her teachings are, if you go to a Theravadan country, Buddhism feels different. Same root, but it feels different. And her language, I want to share some of it because it gives the feeling of the Theravadan roots of this practice. Then Sharon Salzberg's Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness, which is probably, if you were going to get one book, if you wanted to, it's a really rich, wonderful book. And she began studying in 1985 in Burma under Sayadaw U Pandita, who's a very respected teacher was, and I think she teaches at Barry Insight Meditation, but I think Jack Kornfield and that whole lineage came out of this tradition. But it's a little different because I remember, again, who knows what really happened, but I sort of remember Norman Fisher at a certain point saying, Vipassana as it's practiced in this country is really not a religion. It's like they took the Theravadan and they brought it here and they made it accessible, this whole group of teachers. And now, as we know, Vipassana has become a very big movement and mindfulness, but it's not. You maybe feel a little bit of difference when you go from the root Theravadan to Vipassana as it's practiced in America. And then the third is Alan Wallace's, who's Tibetan, The Four Immeasurables Cultivating a Boundless Heart. So it is part of the Mahayana tradition, and the Tibetans practice it and speak of it, but they speak of it in a really different way. And there's one thing in here that sort of delights me, and I think we'll get to it. So the most important thing is, of course, loving kindness. And okay, let me, Ayakema. The Brahmaviharas are called the path of purification that leads to the end of all suffering. So Zen might say, just sit down in the midst of all of it. Do Zazen. Watch it come and watch it go and breathe in and out, and don't try to change it or move it. The Theravadan is much more, no, there are states of mind that are hindrances that will really cause trouble. Study them. They'll get you in trouble. We study the precepts. That's how we do it. And they say there are mind states, meaning loving kindness, compassion, joy, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. You need to consciously train your mind and practice them. I think probably the path of the middle way. Sometimes I think in Zen we get a little empty. It's like, just sit here and we'll breathe. And I think you can also probably get a little compulsive about, I got to get rid of that mind state because, and I want to turn it, anyway, we all know what human beings can do. We're all going to do it no matter what in one, but to pay attention and to know that we have, like it can be really helpful to do it, I mean, maybe we'll just like to do a whole sitting on loving kindness. Just practice loving kindness. Or to pick it up and to take it through your day. You could pick up any one of these and take it with you throughout your day. You kind of can't go wrong studying any of these Brahmaviharas. But here's what Ayakema has to say. Again, Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, I've traveled to these countries. Sri Lanka, sadly, I've read recently, is falling back under more right-wing leadership. You know, being a Buddhist country does not save you from anything, except maybe that you know how to practice in the midst of the suffering of what happens. So, chapter 4, 4 friends. We have 4 friends in our hearts waiting to do our bidding. And she also says we have 5 enemies, but I'm going to skip that part for right now because I don't want to go down that road. But it gives you a flavor of it. Our friends are the 4 divine abidings: loving kindness, compassion, joy with others. That's an interesting way to translate sympathetic joy. Joy with others and equanimity. These have to be searched for in our own hearts. And when we find them lacking in ourselves and know this to be our own detriment, we begin doing something about their development. It's like search your heart. And if you're finding places where you can't be, loving kindness doesn't naturally arise, you might want to do something about this. So now she's going to help us. Loving kindness. Words are dangerous. They give us an illusion of permanence. We are fed with words, but they are nothing but concepts. We've been studying this recently, right? It's like you can't just grab hold of an idea and think you got it. Concepts are not real. Imagine a river. The word river can't proclaim the reality of flowing water. The word river is static. The essential quality of a river is that it flows. Loving kindness can never exist unless it flows from the heart. You can't put loving kindness band-aids on top of things. Although probably if you're going to use a band-aid, it's not a bad one, but keep practicing so that it naturally arises and flows from the heart. As long as it's just embedded in a word, it is nothing. It is worthless. It doesn't mean anything on its own in the same way that the word river can only describe a description which one has to experience in order to know it. If you tell a small child river, it won't know what you were talking about. But if you put the child's hand in the water and let it feel the flow, then the child knows what a river is, whether it is familiar with the word or not. The same goes for loving kindness. The word is meaningless. Only when you feel it flowing from your own heart will you get an idea what the Buddha talked about in so many discourses. Life cannot be lived fully unless it's lived with both heart and mind. Which is then, I would say, Dogen and continuous practice, and Zazen, and taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, precepts, whatever you want to call it, it's enter it deeply. Give yourself to it fully. It's body practice, heart, mind, alive, flowing practice. Loving kindness, or love, whichever word has meaning for you, is not an emotion. We are not talking about an emotion resulting from the presence of a lovable person, or because one is with one's family or children, or because somebody is worthy of love. It's too small. And we know once something's too small, once you set one thing up against the other as I love you because you're this or you're my that or whatever, then we also know that, of course, the if you can love someone in that way that has conditions on it, you can just as easily have pushed not like that person or hate them. We can see in war zones how quickly these things turn. I love you till it gets hard, and then, well, maybe I don't love you so much. I think I'm just going to love these people that are more lovable. It's not very difficult to love one's own children. Most people manage. It is also, well, she said, not terribly difficult to love one's own parents. Well, in America, we struggle with that one some. When the Buddha talks about loving kindness, he talks about a quality of the heart which makes no distinction between any living being. You can see why this is a practice. This is something you practice with your whole life, letting your heart get bigger and deeper and going beyond and going beyond. The highest aspiration mentioned in the loving kindness discourse is that one should love all beings just as a mother loves her only child, or a parent loves their only child. That, to me, and maybe you've heard me say that, has always been, I know when my son was born and still, how much I love him. And I think the Buddha is telling me I can love all beings that way. That blows me away. That will keep me engaged for the rest of my life. Unless one is willing to purify oneself, so it's a practice of purification, until all beings are considered as though one's own children, you haven't understood loving kindness and its importance. It's unequivocal. And you go into Theravadan temples in Burma and Sri Lanka, and this is everywhere, little slogans about loving kindness with this kind of the feeling of purification. And I think it's also why in Theravadan countries, monks and nuns are revered so much, because they really, it's like that's their job to do this. Lay people, you have to take care of your family, and you have to love your family, and of course you know all the things that lay people have to do. But monks and nuns, it's like flowers are strewn at their feet, because this is their primary job, is to cultivate these qualities and to live them for everybody. The heart needs training, because by nature it isn't constituted to always feel loving kindness. Have you noticed this? The small heart. We'll get to that. By nature it contains both love and hate. It contains ill will, rejection, resentment, and fear, and also loving kindness. But unless we diminish the hate and enlarge the love by doing something about it in our daily life, we have no chance of experiencing that peaceful feeling which loving kindness generates in the heart. Having love in one's heart, unconditional love for others, creates security in the heart. One knows how one is going to react. I think that's very beautiful. It's one of the reasons I practice. I would like to have some kind of a moment of gap of choice, at least, that if something is coming towards me that could give rise to aversion or hatred, or that there's enough space that I could take the backward step, and one never knows, but I would like to cultivate and think that loving kindness can keep coming forward, because I know and you know that's what the world needs. That's what the world is. And we'll get to that part because that's more Mahayana. When one is totally reliable, you have no fear. Okay, we'll come back to her in a minute. Purify yourself. Pay attention. Do no harm. Now, Sharon Salzberg, the American Vipassana community, how they took these teachings and transformed them to make them more accessible to Westerners, I think. Throughout our lives, we long to love ourselves more deeply and to feel connected with others. So notice it starts with loving yourself. And we'll get to, there's a story here about when the Dalai Lama first heard that Westerners not only didn't love themselves, but felt aversion towards themselves. It seems like he honestly didn't know what he was being told. In fact, maybe I should, is that here? No, that's an Alice. We'll get back to that. Instead, we often contract, fear intimacy, and suffer a bewildering sense of separation. It's pretty psychological. We begin to get more psychological, more West, we come into the West. We crave love, and yet we are lonely. Our delusion of being separate from one another, of being apart from all that is around us, gives rise to all of this pain. What is the way out of this? That's why most of us come to practice, is because of some kind of experience of personal pain. I don't think that's necessarily true if you grew up in a Buddhist culture. It would just, it's just in the air. Spiritual practice, by uprooting our personal mythologies of isolation, uncovers the radiant, joyful heart within each of us and manifests this radiance to the world. We find beneath the wounding concepts of separation a connection both to ourselves and to all beings. We find a source of great happiness that is beyond concepts and beyond convention, and freeing ourselves from the illusion of separation allows us to live in a natural freedom rather than being driven by preconceptions about our own boundaries and limitations. Now, I'll just say, as my own little commentary, is you can also see the beautiful thing about what has happened in the West is that we have made these more emotional and psychological. And the mindfulness movement has sometimes gone so far down the path of it can be, how do you be a more productive worker? Or it's gone lots of different ways, which is wonderful, because of course we want this in the workplace. That's not the question, but it becomes, we're Westerners. We are really self-oriented, and it becomes a kind of dangerous line of what's a self-improvement project. So we just pay attention there. The Buddha described the spiritual path that leads to this freedom as the liberation of the heart, which is love. And he taught a systemic, integrated path that moves the heart out of isolating contraction into true connection. So now we're to the Buddha. This is the root of the teachings. That path is still with us as a living tradition of meditation practices that cultivate love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Together, in Pali, the language spoken by the Buddha, they're the Brahmaviharas. Brahma meaning heavenly, and Vihara means abode or home. By practicing these meditations, we establish love, metta, compassion, karuna, sympathetic joy, mudita, and equanimity, upekkha, as our home. It's like home. It's the same as the refuges. Home. The integrity we develop on a spiritual path comes from being able to distinguish for ourselves the habits and influences in the mind which are skillful and lead to love and awareness, and from those which are unskillful and reinforce our false sense of separation. So when we sit in zazen following our breath, we watch our feelings and emotions come and go, and we become more familiar with, oh, I just got caught in aversion, and you notice thought patterns, and you notice what happens in the body. You notice what happens if you come back to the breath. So there's a very subtle alignment of coming back home over and over, not making one thing necessarily good or bad, but the space gets bigger so that things arise and pass, and we're not so hooked. Our reactivity doesn't go away, but there's more space in there, and you get more when you get hooked. You get the suffering of it, and then you think, oh, I want to come back. And you begin to taste, there's more space and room and loving kindness. Oh, this is what I want to cultivate. This is how I want to live. This is what feels true. So the Buddha's early teachings out of the Four Noble Truths, said, abandon what is unskillful. You can abandon the unskillful. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. If this abandoning the unskillful would bring harm or suffering, I would not ask you to abandon it. But as it brings benefit and happiness, therefore I say, abandon what is unskillful. Stop it. Which I'm sort of laughing, but it's like, you want peace in the world? Pay attention. But we also know how we can turn this against ourselves, right? Because we're Westerners, we're really good at this. Cultivate the good. One can cultivate the good. If it were not possible, I would not ask you to do it. I actually love this. I think, oh, the Buddha's telling me I can be a Buddha. Okay. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way to me, but okay, my feet are on the path. If this cultivation were to bring harm and suffering, I would not ask you to do it. But as this cultivation brings benefit and happiness, I say, cultivate the good. Maybe some of you know this. I don't think when the Buddha first taught the metta meditation, it was an antidote to fear, because he sent a group of monks off to meditate in the forest that was inhabited by tree spirits. And they resented the presence of the monks, and so they did all kinds of terrible things to the monks and made them really afraid. And the monks went running to the Buddha and said, Buddha, what are you doing? Don't make us go back there. There's really scary stuff out there. And the Buddha said, I am going to send you back to the same forest, but I will provide you with the only protection you will need. This was the first teaching of metta meditation, and he encouraged the monks not only to recite the metta phrases, but to actually practice them. So the monks were able to go back into the forest, and of course the tree spirits all calmed down, and everybody aligned in meditation. But I think that's a powerful teaching, is I don't know if you remember 10 or 15 years ago, it was in Burma, Myanmar, which is now awful again. They were arresting and shooting monks. It was one of those awful things that happen. And the monks went into the streets and they marched reciting the loving kindness. And people all over the world recited loving kindness with them. It was one of the most it was very moving. The power of, I gave a talk once to a group when I came back from Myanmar, Burma, about what was happening there, and there were a lot of Burmese people in the audience, and I started saying the Metta Sutta. I mean, I don't know why, and everybody who was Burmese in the audience knew it, and all started like reciting it together because it's just like it's in their bones. It's like it's good. Chant the Metta Sutta enough until you know it. So then when you get scared, those phrases are there. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a taste of Alan Wallace, Tibetan. He starts with working with negation, working with what these others teachers have been saying is work with the negative states of mind, transform them, purify them. But then he says, which is more what Mahayana and Zen says, he calls it intuitive wisdom. Suzuki Roshi called Zazen your intuitive, open your intuition. In this mode, spiritual maturation is not so much a matter of inquiry and penetrating or cultivating certain qualities. All the insight, all the love, all the realization we need is already here. So the emphasis is much more not on purifying to get rid of something bad to get to someplace else. It's already here, and it's called Buddha nature. It's just obscured, but you don't need to gain anything. Anything you gain is going to be lost at death anyway, so it's not going to be very significant in the big picture. This is an affirmative path, not focusing on how to get rid of something, but how to bring something to light. Can you feel a little subtle difference, a turning of it here? We're not setting ourselves up against something. We're just coming home to what's already here, which is the true nature of everything. It's an affirmation that consciousness is one of the essential ingredients of this universe, of all existence, of all reality, that everything is love. The natural outflow of everything when you know interconnection and interbe is compassion. And that sympathetic joy is, of course, you would be happy for somebody else because they're you and you're them. And equanimity is, and the absolute level is, this world couldn't be anything other than what it is. 100 million thousand causes and conditions all brought everything to this moment. So just be present in it. And when we align with it, instead of trying to push against it or make it different, then that's where love and kindness and compassion will flow through us and the whole world. It's what Zazen is. Okay, so here, this is the part I wanted to read to you, which I thought was makes me laugh. Maybe it's my Sesshin mind. Maybe you'll forgive me. The Buddha offered a metaphor for this in which he likened sentient beings like ourselves to atoms. And inside each atom is a Buddha. Now, I remembered this story, but I didn't remember where it came from. Maybe you've heard me tell it before. So the Buddha, who is manifestly present, has only one task: to take his Vajra sledgehammer. Now, that's not exactly Zen. Tibetans use Vajra sledgehammers and split open those atoms so that what was latent now becomes manifest. The Buddha is a cosmic atom splitter, and we are atoms. So how do you like that? You can enter this any way you want. If you want to draw pictures or visualize being a Buddha with a Vajra sledgehammer, it says here, Buddha says it's okay. This entails a sense of discovery rather than cultivation, a simple unveiling rather than an arduous effort at development. It's where Thich Nhat Hanh says, relax. Not like go to sleep, relax, but just deep, here. In. Out. And Thich Nhat Hanh's Zen, since we just studied that, Vietnam is right on the cusp of the Theravada and the Mahayana countries. So his tradition holds both. The question then becomes, Alan Wallace says from the Tibetan tradition, how can we unveil this potential of the heart and mind and uncover the wisdom, compassion, and power of the spirit? And just one more thing about loving kindness. Buddhaghosa, who was one of the earlier compilers of the Buddha's teachings, said the Buddha said, "Whoever loves himself will never harm another." If you love yourself truly, you will not harm another person, which means pay attention to your relationship with this self. Because of course, whatever is here, we're going to project it out there. And to think that we're going to love and take care of the whole world while we're still harboring something against ourselves. Look deeper. Okay, here's the story about the Dalai Lama. 1990 was the third Mind and Life conference about emotions and mental states and healing. And the Vipassana teacher Sharon Salzberg at one point said to the Dalai Lama, she explained that when teaching loving kindness practice, she begins by encouraging the students to focus on themselves. First, you develop loving kindness for yourself, and then for a loved one, then for a neutral one, and then we know this, you extend it out and out. You expand it out, but you always start with the self, which seemed really important in America because we have such self-contempt. It's so prevalent. If you skip the first step, loving kindness towards the self, people might maintain the position, I'm no good, but I hope you're happy. You know anything about this? That is not a very firm foundation. So she asked him, what about this? And he looked at her as if she had just said, all the people I teach have heads made of green cheese. This is a man, he's talking about the Dalai Lama, who has traveled a lot, but when he is meeting with the president or the Senate or environmental groups or so forth, they're working on agendas. They don't talk about their low self-esteem. You mean, he said, people really don't feel they're worthy to be happy? He couldn't imagine. They feel contempt for themselves? Sharon Salzberg said yes, and the whole room fell silent because it was obvious he was dealing with a very alien topic. So I think culturally, what an interesting thing we got born in the West. And that we do know about self-contempt. We didn't live up in the mountains of Tibet, and it's wonderful that they come down and they help us, and I'm sure we help them by revealing more about how Westerners, who seem to mostly dominate the world politically, or it's important. What is your relationship to this self? What do you think of yourself? So here's a little exercise I thought we could talk about, if I can find it. Oh, maybe it's from Ayakema. She says at night, but we could do it right now. You could have a conversation. You could notice at night, or you could notice right now. Maybe we'll start with, well, she says towards another person, but how often do you feel loving kindness towards yourself at the end of each day? How much have you felt loving kindness towards yourself? And how often have you felt anger, hurt, resentment, rejection, fear, and anxiety towards yourself, which then, of course, gets projected out to another person? So let's talk about loving kindness. And what's that have to do with this very self and this very life that you're living? And how might you practice with it? Remembering who you truly are, and of also becoming more aware of when you're turning the self against the self. Okay? Let's go in groups of 3.